NBC presents the DiMaggio Show. Starring the Yankee skipper himself, featuring Jack Bailey, with the Kids versus Grownups Sports Quiz, with DiMaggio's personal answers to the listeners, a reporter's exciting story about this week's famous guest. And now here he is, the star of our transcribed show, the center fielder of the world champion New York Yankees, and one of baseball's all-time greats. Here he is in person, Joltin' Joe DiMaggio.
Thank you very much, and hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be back on the air again, and we're going to do all we can to make this new series of broadcasts over NBC entertaining and interesting. Just yesterday, my teammates and I returned to New York after a short exhibition road trip. Now with spring training behind us, we're all set for the baseball season ahead. The new season should be very exciting, and I hope to bring some of that excitement to these microphones. Seated alongside of me is my radio partner, Jack Barry, and between the two of us, we hope to bat out a show each week that you'll really enjoy. Right, Jack?
Yes, indeed, Joe. The last time I saw you was down in St. Petersburg, and you were sure batting those balls around the park.
Well, I must admit, I feel better this year than I have felt in a long time. I'm real anxious for the season to get started. But right now, let's get on with the program. You know, Jack, there's one thing about radio I really like. The broadcast is never canceled because of snow.
Well, Joe, there are many fine things about radio, and one of them is having you back on the air with us. And when it was announced in all the papers that you were going to do a new series of shows over NBC, we received a lot of letters from listeners. And as you and I discussed some weeks ago, you remember we decided that each week we'd start the show by having you answer some of the most interesting letters received here at NBC.
Well, I sure do remember, and I'll do my best to answer them. Whose first letter from?
Well, we received a letter from a Mr. George Tanker of Washington, D.C., and he asked this question. He said, considering the lineup of the various teams, as well as what's happened during spring training, how do you think the teams will finish in both the American and National League?
Well, now, Jack, you know, for the first question, that's really putting me on the spot.
It's a big order.
It certainly is, but I'm going to do the best I can, and I want you to know one thing, that this is absolutely my opinion and only my opinion, so if I'm wrong at the end of the year, don't take it out on me. But in the American League, I naturally like the New York Yankees. The Boston Red Sox are going to furnish all the fight, believe me. And I think for the third spot, Detroit is going to be there, and they're going to battle all the way. And I'm looking for Cleveland and Philadelphia in that order. Now in the National League, I haven't seen all the teams down in Florida, but I will say the team that looks best to me right at this particular time is the Brooklyn Dodgers. And I'm going to pick St. Louis for second, and the Boston Braves are going to furnish an awful lot of trouble. I'm not going to certainly put them out of it, but I'm going to pick them for third anyhow. And, of course, we have the New York Giants, who can be the big surprise, and I'm going to put them in fourth spot. And I sincerely hope that they do a lot better than fourth, believe me. And, well, now we get back to Philadelphia. I understand that Philadelphia is a young ball club, and I think that Philadelphia will furnish quite a bit of excitement for the rest of the league.
Thank you, Joe. Now, we received a letter from a Miss Helen Toulouse of the Bronx, New York. It's sort of two questions in one, Joe. The first one she asks is, just how serious is your shoulder ailment? And the second one is, will it interfere with your playing this season?
Well, I gave that story out in Florida. I guess it did cause quite a furor, but I relax in a certain way that the arm pops out. And by just rotating the shoulder, why, it comes back into place. And it certainly is not going to bother my baseball this year. I do have to watch out how I slide because I think that's how I originally got the injury. I will have to, no doubt, put the arm over the head so I don't have the arm hit the ground when I'm sliding.
I know Yankee fans will be happy to hear it's nothing serious. A letter now from a Mrs. Joan Hammer of Brookline, Massachusetts. She writes and says, my 10-and-a-half-year-old son thinks about nothing but baseball. His only interest in life seems to be this particular game. Is there a chance for him to get into the big league, and do you recommend it?
Why, there's a chance for every boy to become a ball player. You know, when I was a boy, I looked forward to being a ball player, but I certainly didn't feel as though any scout was going to look me over and maybe eventually play with some professional team and wind up in the major leagues. And I think that if the young ball player is out there and wants to become a ball player, the main thing to do is to play baseball and listen to the old timers' advice and go out and give everything you have. And as far as recommending it, I would say yes, but I also recommend an education. That is, if you don't cut the buck in baseball, why, you always have something to lean back on.
Thank you, Joe. Well, I'm afraid there's so much we have to do on this week's show that we've got to move on to other things. But this letter answering portion of the show will be a regular feature. So if any of you listeners do have questions you'd like to pose to Joe DiMaggio, by all means, send them in.
I think they'll help us to get to know one another better. We'll sort of be able to exchange ideas and opinions. I know that I'll find it very interesting, and I sincerely hope that you will, too. Many thanks. For the past few minutes, I've been answering questions, but now I'm going to give someone else a chance. You know, when it comes to information about different subjects, kids will concede that grown-ups know more than they do. But when it comes to sports, the kids draw the line. So each week, we're going to have a sports quiz between the two teams, one of grown-ups and the other of kids. These teams will match their wits and knowledge in sports. Want to add anything, Jeff?
Just this little bit, Joe. The teams are going to play a 3-inning baseball game. And for every question answered correctly, that team scores 1 run. At the end of the quiz, the team scoring the most runs is declared the winner.
Jack, you pitch the questions and I'll umpire.
Right, Joe, I'm all set.
Then let's play ball.
Lined up on stage here with us are 2 teams, one of kids, one of grown-ups. On the boys' team are Charles Spear, who is 13, and Nick Gaetani, who is 14, and they're both members of the boys' clubs, too. We'll get to that in a minute. And they're going to compete against the grown-up team composed of Mrs. Catherine Avi and Mr. George Zimmerman. And Charles Spear, you're up first, so let's get right to you. For the kids' team, here's the first question. Here comes this pitch. What baseball team is nicknamed the Pirates?
The Pittsburgh Pirates.
That is correct.
Good for you, and that's 1 run for the kids. On to the grown-ups, Mrs. Catherine Avi. Mrs. Avi, you didn't want to give your age, did you?
No.
You still don't. All right, you don't have to, but you do have to answer this question. What college team won the Rose Bowl game last January? Our organist is going to play a song that'll give you a clue.
Iowa.
Oh, I'm sorry, but the answer was Ohio State, and the song was Down by the Ohio.
We're awfully sorry, but the score is now 1-0 in favor of the kids' team. On to the second member of the kids' team, Nick Gaetani. Nick, is this true or false? Swimmers are sometimes called tank men.
True.
That is true. A swimming pool is often called a tank, so swimmers are called tankmen.
And the kids have 2 runs to their credit. Mr. George Zimmerman. Mr. Zimmerman, how old are you, sir?
34, sir.
Oh, you don't mind telling your age.
I don't mind.
Good for you. Let's see how you do with this question. Is the flying kilometer or kilometer an event in skiing, ice skating, or swimming?
I'll say swimming.
Swimming, do you say?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry, the answer is skiing. And by the way, the flying kilometer is one of the most dangerous events in sports. The skis are weighted with lead, and I'm told those fellas travel as fast as 60 miles an hour.
And here's the score. At the end of the first inning of play, the score is 2 for the kids, a 0 for the grown-ups. On now with the second inning. Right back to you, Charles Spear. Charles Spear, what branch of the boys club you going to?
Well, I go to the Kips Bay Boys Club.
I see. Good for you. Here's your question, Charles. Tell us what sport this song reminds you of.
I think that'll be basketball.
Basketball is right. And the song was a tisket, a tasket, I lost my yellow basket.
Good for you. On now, Mrs. Catherine Avi. What great boxing champion was known as the Boston Strong Boy? Very famous.
I don't know.
Want to take a guess? Very famous many years ago.
Sullivan.
Well, you are absolutely right. The answer is John L. Sullivan.
On now to Nick Gaetani for the kids' team. Is this true or false? Babe Ruth was once a pitcher.
True.
That is right. The Babe pitched for the Boston Red Sox. He still holds the record for pitching the most consecutive scoreless innings in World Series play.
On now to Mr. George Zimmerman here at the end of the second inning. A little lady named Miss Suggs has been showing championship form since she entered the professional ranks of golf. We want you to tell us her first name, and the song you hear now will give you a hint. What do you say?
I think her name is Louise, isn't it?
Louise is the song, and of course that's Miss Suggs' first name.
Good for you, Mr. Zimmerman. Here's the score. At the end of the second inning of play, well, the grown-ups have 2 runs, but the kids have 4 runs. Now, here we go. Here we go into the third and final inning of play, and the grown-ups are going to have to do mighty good in this particular inning. Here's the first question, Charles Spear, age 13. What is the most popular sport in Cuba? Is it soccer, tennis, or jai-alai?
I think that would be highlight.
Well, jai-alai is right.
Good for you. And now, Catherine Avi, Mrs. Catherine Avi, is this statement true or false? Now, be careful on this one. The Brooklyn Dodgers got their name because of the unusually large number of trolley cars that overran Brooklyn at the time. True or false?
False.
Oh, I'm sorry, but it's true.
And now it's on to Nick Gattani. Nick, our organist, is going to play the fight song of a college famous for its football teams. Can you tell us the name of the college? What do you say, Nick?
That's Notre Dame.
That is right. And that's one of my favorite football teams.
And here is the final question. The last question in our baseball game for Mr. George Zimmerman, age 34. What famous baseball manager was nicknamed Little Napoleon?
McCarthy.
No, I'm sorry, but the answer is John McGraw, who managed the Giants for 30 years.
And now here is the score at the end of our baseball game. The grown-ups have 2 runs, but they were swamped because the kids have 6 runs. Well, our congratulations to the member of the kids team, and they did prove what Joe DiMaggio said at the beginning, that kids probably know as much and sometimes more about sports than the grown-ups. And to each of you members of the winning kids team, you're going to receive a handsome-looking 17-jewel Hellbros wristwatch. And Mrs. Avi and Mr. Zimmerman on the grown-ups team, we have a little consolation gift for you, and this is no editorial comment, but we want you to have a year's subscription to Sport magazine.
Well, all I can say is that I really appreciate your efforts because I know what it means to be on the batting line myself. Many thanks for joining us.
Each week, Joe DiMaggio will invite a famous sports writer to tell his favorite sports story on our program. Our story this week was selected by Tom Meany, associate editor of Collier's Magazine, and for 25 years, one of the country's leading sports reporters and columnists. Here he is, Tom Meany.
Hello, Tom.
Hi, Joe.
You know, the last time I saw you was down in St. Petersburg at the Yankee training camp.
That's right, Joe. I always manage to take in a few weeks of spring training every year. You know, we writers have to get in shape for the season, too.
Well, Tom, as a sports writer, how do you think the baseball season will wind up this year?
Well, Joe, I feel pretty sure about the Brooklyn Dodgers. I think they'll win the National League pennant.
Well, that's what I think, too. But how about the American League?
Well, Joe, that's a pretty delicate question. To me, the Red Sox look like the team to beat. After all, they lost out by only 1 game in the last 2 years, and this season their pitching has improved quite a bit.
Tom, I realize that you got to call them the way you see them. But the Yankees are going to upset your predictions this year.
Well, I hope so, but it's going to be a red-hot pennant race this year, Joe.
Well, it sure does. By the way, Tom, have you ever played baseball yourself?
Yes, but not as much as I would have liked. I've always been too busy writing about sports.
In fact, don't you have a new book coming out?
Yes, it'll be published on May 15th. It's called Baseball's Greatest Hitters. And by the way, Joe, there's a chapter in it about you.
Well, thanks for putting me in with such good company. But now, Tom, we'd like to take time out and hear your favorite sports story. What is it about?
Well, Joe, it's about a baseball player who came into his own last year. For the sake of the story, we'll call him Tommy. You know, he'd been playing great ball in the big leagues for 10 years as a hitter and a fielder and as a hustler. In fact, he played so well that everybody took him for granted. But last season, the fans finally discovered what a great player Tommy really was. Before the season opened, everyone predicted his team would finish in the second division. A few of the stars were out of the lineup with injuries, and frankly, there was panic in the front office of the baseball club.
Ted Varner is my name. I work in that front office Tom Meany just told you about, and believe me, if you add a couple of acres of gloom to that panic, you've got the picture of a ball club in distress. I guess I was about the only one who wasn't too worried, because, you see, I hadn't forgotten about Tommy. I was counting on him to help see us through. We opened the 49 season against Washington, and it looked as though we were going to start off on the wrong foot as the Senators jumped out to a one-run lead and held it. Then in our half of the ninth, with 2 away, we got a runner on base. But this had happened in other innings, and always the runner had been stranded. The crowd began to ride our boys as though we had lost 15 games in a row. Now Tommy was at bat, and they seemed to be daring him to smash one over the fence like they're heroes of the old days. But the crowd's booing didn't seem to bother Tommy. He stepped up to the plate. The pitcher delivered. Right! The crowd's booing greeted him as he let the first one go by. Tommy rubbed some dirt on his hands, took a firm grip on the bat. The pitch came in, and Tommy took a mighty swing that sent the ball sailing over the right field wall. His 2-run homer won the ball game. But that was only the beginning for Tommy. The next day, he broke up the game with another homer. Then day after day, he hammered one pitcher after another. 4 hits off the Indians, 2 homers against the Browns. Tommy was made to order for the fans and for the front office. We were on top now with a safe lead. You know, many people think that a baseball player's life is full of glamour, but take my word for it, there's plenty of wear and tear. During the height of the pennant race, Tommy broke his toe in batting practice one morning. It was a painful injury, and not everybody knows what went on between Tommy and the doc before that game.
Tommy, I think you'll be out at least a week with that toe. You banged it up, but good.
Oh, but I can walk on it without much trouble. Look, Doc.
Yeah. What are you going to do when you try to put a shoe on?
Doc, I can see you were never a Boy Scout. Lend me your knife a second.
Huh?
Now, don't look at me that way. I'm not dangerous.
I hope you know what you're doing. Huh. Well, now, don't you look cute with that big white bandaged toe sticking out of your shoe. I can't let you go out in the field like that. They'd take away my license.
No imagination, Doc. I'm way ahead of you. See this can of black paint?
Huh?
Now we dip the nasty toe in it. There. No more white toe. Just 2 black shoes like any other player. I just want to make sure that nobody will know the difference.
Oh, Tommy, I give up.
I wanted you to know that incident with the doc because it was so typical of Tommy. Throughout his entire career, this attitude seemed to dominate everything he did. He shrugged off the bad breaks with ease. But let me tell you about the time it looked as though even Tommy would have to give in. Late last August, he crashed into a fence while chasing a fly ball. He had to be carried from the field unconscious. The next day, the newspaper said he would be out for the rest of the season. Tommy got the news in the hospital.
Doc, do you believe that story in the newspapers?
I'm afraid it's true, Tommy.
Doc, do you always have to be a pessimist? What would you say if I told you I'd be playing again in a couple of weeks?
I'd say you were wrong, Tommy. I'm not kidding. This time it's serious.
You really mean it?
Yeah, Tommy. You fractured 2 of your vertebrae. You'll be laid up for a long time.
I guess this is one time black paint won't help.
I'm afraid not.
But to everyone's amazement, probably including Tommy's, he was back in the game in 3 weeks, wearing a heavy brace. He couldn't have returned at a more crucial moment. The Boston Red Sox had been whittling down our lead, and the heat was really on. I'll never forget that last day of the season. We were in a deadlock for first place with the Red Sox, and this was the game that would decide the pennant. A crowd of 68,000 people packed the stands, roaring at every play. Tommy drove in a run in the first inning, and we led by that slim margin through the 7th. But the final 2 innings seemed like an eternity. In the last half of the eighth, Mel Parnell, the league's leading pitcher, came in for the Sox. And he was out to set our boys down in order. Tommy was the first man to face him. Parnell went into his windup and whipped the ball across the plate. Right! Again, Parnell went into his windup and slammed his fast one at Tommy. Right! It was 2-0 on Tommy now. He stood there calmly, adjusted his cap, and got set for the next one. A hush came over the stadium as Parnell got the signal from the catcher. He studied Tommy for a moment and then delivered his Sunday pitch. Going into the stands for a home run! That home run started a rally that netted our team 4 runs. We beat the Red Sox 5-3, and the pennant was ours. Tommy, injured though he was, had played an important part in the victory.
Well, Joe, that's my favorite sports story. But there's one other thing about Tommy that I'd like to mention. He's always been a team player. And the wonderful thing about his ball club is that everybody feels the same way as Tommy. Maybe that's the reason for their great success.
Well, Tom Meany, thanks for that wonderful story. And now I'd like to introduce to you the man you've been telling us about. And here he is in person, old reliable Tommy Henry. Welcome to our show, Tommy.
Thanks, Joe. It's great to be with you.
Tommy, I think the first thing our audience would like to know is how you kept yourself busy all winter.
Well, that wasn't too tough. I went to a lot of banquets and watched a lot of football, and mostly I stayed home with the wife and the kids.
Oh, by the way, how many kids do you have, Tommy?
Just 3 so far, Joe.
Well, I remember back in 1942 when one of those kids started you off on a pretty busy day. And it's one of my favorite stories.
Well, Joe, it happened that my daughter was christened in the morning, and then we had a short luncheon, and then I left for Yankee Stadium and played a doubleheader against Washington in the afternoon, and then I got on a train and went out to Cleveland and signed up to enter the Coast Guard.
And, Tommy, what was the greatest thrill you ever had in sports?
Well, about a week later, Joe, I played my last game in Yankee Stadium, and then the last time at bat, the public address announcer said that this was while I was standing at home plate ready to bat against Dizzy Trout. He made the announcement that this was to be my last time at bat for the duration, and the people gave me a great ovation, and I was acknowledged it and took my hat off and was ready to play ball, and I stepped in there, and Dizzy Trout looked at me and he says, "Get out of there." He says, "This is once in a lifetime. Enjoy this." And that really hit me right to the core, and it was, to this day, it's the biggest thing that ever happened to me.
And I also remember, Tommy, if you can't correct me if I'm wrong, you got 3 hits that day?
Yeah, that's right, Joe. You don't forget those?
No, I don't. And, Tommy, you know, we all have our favorite ballparks, and we also have our toughest. What is the toughest park for you to hit in?
Well, I'd pick Fenway Park in Boston because it has the longest right field wall. But Washington has an awful long one, too, and I'd put those 2 down for that reason, that the longer the fences, the tougher it is to get a safe hit.
Mm-hmm. And tell me about something about those leagues that you played in before you got up here.
Well, before I got up here, the toughest park I'd ever played in was at Menneson, Pennsylvania. That was a Class D ball club, and they had a tree in deep center field, and they had a roadway that cut across, and an embankment in the right center field. You had to know something besides catching the ball. You had to be able to dodge out there, too.
And wasn't Menneson the place where you hit that pretty long ball?
Well, it was in that league, Joe. It happened to be Charleroi, Pennsylvania, and I hit a ball over the right field wall, and it landed in the Monongahela River, and the last it was seen was going through New Orleans in the Mississippi.
Well, that sure was a long hit. Tommy, after being in the outfield for so many years, how do you like your new job at first base?
I like it very much, Joe. All these years they've been saying about the outfielders should pay to get in the ballpark. Well, I don't believe that. You have a lot of running around to do out there, and you know as well as I do when the pitcher has a bad day where the outfielder has to run down his mistakes. And I hope that this year I'll be looking around at you. You can run them down from here.
Well, let's hope you don't have to look too far, Tommy. Tommy, we all have a lot of hobbies, you know. You might have several. What are yours?
I have quite a record collection. I like to collect all kind of records. I fool around the piano a little bit, and I'm also a member of the SPEBSQSA.
Hey, what do those initials stand for?
That stands for the Society for the Preservation and Encouragement of Barbershop Quartet Singing in America, Incorporated. And you know, I was on a championship barbershop quartet in Ohio in 1947.
Well, I'll have more respect for you from now on when you sing in the shower, Tom.
I'll bet.
And Tommy, are there any tips on baseball that you'd like to leave with our audience?
Well, for the older people, I don't believe that they can pick out a better sport to watch. And for the young fellows, I think that I just say the same thing over and over to kids that like to play ball. There's only one way to play ball, and that's to hustle, and you get the most out of it that way. From there on, it's up to your own God-given ability.
Well, thanks, Tommy, for a wonderful interview. But don't go away because there's something coming up now which I'm sure you'll enjoy. Thanks again for being with us, Tommy Henry.
Well, Joe, at the start of the program, you spent some time answering letters which were sent in by our listeners. And, of course, we hope many people will send in letters so that you can answer them. But right now I'm going to go out into the studio with the portable microphone and give the audience here at NBC a chance to pitch their questions at you, at Tommy Henrik, and at Tom Meany.
Well, that's okay with me. Is it okay with you fellas?
All right with me, Joe.
Good. Who's got the first pitch, Jack?
A gentleman right here whose name is Henry Carrasquillo. And what is your question? And who is it directed at?
At Tom Meany. I'd like to ask him what are the chances of the Yankees obtaining Ray Scarborough?
I think you should have asked George Weiss. Frankly, I don't know. I know the Yankees would like to get another pitcher, as what club wouldn't, but I think Clark Griffith's a tough man to deal with.
Thank you very much, Tom Meany. A young fella now. What's your name?
Dennis Burhouse,
And how old are you?
7.
What's the question?
I like to ask Tommy Henry how his knee is.
Well, Dennis, I'm glad to tell you that the doctor in Baltimore gave me a pretty good okay on it. He removed a lot of fear from my mind, and I'm ready to go, I think.
Thanks a lot, and it was very nice of you to ask that, Dennis. What's your name, sir?
Charles Sikoriak.
What's your question?
I'd like to ask Joe DiMaggio, whom would you consider a better all-around ball player, Lou Gehrig or Babe Ruth?
That would be a little tough for me to answer, and I'm going to tell you why, Charlie. I had the pleasure of seeing Lou Gehrig play baseball, but I didn't get the chance to see Babe Ruth play ball. I don't know if Tom wants to answer the question because he has been around sports a lot more than I have.
I notice Tom Meany does want to give an answer.
Well, I'd say Babe Ruth as an all-around ball player. Gehrig was a great hitter, a great first baseman, a great team man. But Babe was a wonderful outfielder and also one of the best left-handed pitchers that ever played ball.
Thank you very much, Tom Meany and Joe DiMaggio. What is your name?
Robert Morgan,
And who do you want to ask the question?
Joe DiMaggio.
What's the question?
How many bats do you use in 1 year?
Well, I don't count them, but we certainly do use an awful lot of bats. Already this year up to date, that is, in spring training, I have cracked something like about 14 bats, and that is a record for me.
You haven't cracked them. A lot of other fellows have been using your
I
bat.
keep ordering them.
Well, Joe, I'm sorry, but that's just about all the time we have left for questions from our studio audience.
Well, I'm sorry too, Jack, but I'll be looking forward to more questions next week.
And Tom Meany, for reporting that wonderful story about Old Reliable, we'd like you to accept this smart-looking portable Underwood Champion typewriter. We're sure you'll be able to put it to good use in batting out more of your top-notch sports stories.
Well, I'd like to thank Tommy Henrik and Tom Meany for joining us this week. Many thanks for coming down.
NBC has presented the Joe DiMaggio Show, the first in a new series of programs starring one of baseball's all-time greats, Joe DiMaggio, and featuring Jack Barry. Join us again next week at this time over these same NBC stations for another entertaining and interesting half-hour of sports. In this week's dramatic cast, you heard Everett Sloan, Leon Janney, and Ed Latimer. Music was by Arlo. Sports consultant Gene Shore. The transcribed Joe DiMaggio Show is written by Mike Oppenheimer, directed by Dan Enright, and is a Barry Enright production. This is Fred Collins speaking.
Stay tuned for thrilling science fiction Dimension X on NBC.